So up to this point, we've focused exclusively on the server side in our walkthrough of the code. Let's now turn our attention to the client. And we'll see that this is the part of the application that actually sends requests to the server using the various mechanisms defined by Spring. And as always, you can find this example in the EX2 project, in my web MVC folder, in the live lessons GitHub repository. So to make life a little easier for our test program, we define a class that we call the BerraQuoteClient class. And it performs synchronous remote method invocations on the BerraQuote controller microservice to make requests for Yogi Berra quotes. And you can see here, it's just a good old Java class, but we annotate it, tell Spring it's a component, and that will inform it to do auto detection and auto wiring of various dependencies. Speaking of which, here's an example. We have a field called mQuotesProxy, which is a BerraQuotesProxy, and this field is auto-wired by Spring's dependency injection framework. So we don't have to worry about creating an instance of BerraQuotesProxy. It's done for us automatically. Here's an example of what the getAllQuotes method looks like. So as you can see, this is going to take a strategy integer indicating one of the implementation strategies like parallel streams or sequential streams or so on. And it's going to make a call through this thing called a proxy, mQuotesProxy, and that will go over to the server and get all the quotes back and return them as a list. Here's another example of a client-side method called getQuotes, which takes a strategy and a list of quote IDs. And you can see here, we just use the mQuotesProxy to forward the request to the server to get the quote IDs for that particular strategy. And there's stuff for the two search methods as well, very similar kind of idea. Now that we've talked a bit about, and the purpose of this class is to basically write everything in just good old Java. You'll see that there's really no HTTP related stuff here at all. Let's go take a look at the BerraQuoteProxy class. This is the part of the code that hides all the details of the remote method invocations that are done under the hood using HTTP. And this, of course, applies the proxy pattern, which is defined in the good old Gang of Four book and the Pattern-Oriented Software Architecture book, Volume 1. So here we have BerraQuotesProxy, which is also a component, so auto-wiring can be done. In this case, we're going to auto-wire into something called a REST template. For Spring Web MVC, REST templates are very important, and you need to understand how they work. However, they should typically be abstracted and hidden by and large, so you don't have to get caught up in the details of how they work. You want to figure out how they work one time, put them into a reusable proxy class implementation, and then have your rest of your code make those calls to avoid all the low-level details we're about to walk through. Here are the proxy methods themselves. You can see here we have getAllQuotes, getQuotes, search quotes, and so on. These proxy methods shield all the rest of the client and the test driver from low-level details of programming with HTTP. So let's take a look at an example. This is the getAllQuotes method. It takes a strategy integer that indicates which service or which strategy should be used to provide the quotes. And here's where it gets fun. We then use something called a URI component builder to make ourselves a URI. URI is basically the part that identifies which particular endpoint we want to talk to. In this case, it's the all quotes endpoint, and also what parameter we want to pass. So we'd say, I want to build a URI that contains the getAllQuotes routing ID. I want to give it the strategy as a field or as a part of the query portion, and I want to give it the value of, say, 0 in this case, and I want you to turn that into a URI string. So that's what gets created at the bottom, this /allQuotes $strategy equals 0. And then we're going to use a little helper class that I've developed called WebUtils make get request. And that takes the request REST template, the URI, and then the class associated with what the return value should be, which in this case is going to be a list of quotes defined here as an array of quotes. And that then goes ahead and makes the GET request. It builds the GET request, sends it to the server, gets the results back, and converts them back into a list of quotes. We will look at this implementation probably next class, although you can look at the code now if you want to see how it works. Here's what getQuotes does. It takes an integer and a list of quote IDs. It uses this component builder to build the URI we see at the bottom, which is going to have the quotes, routing name, the strategy to be 0, and then the quote IDs portion of this URI to be the various BerraQuotes we care about at location 15, 2, 29, 40, and 17. And we'll talk later about how you do this in coding and how that works. So we build this URI. Once again, we make that request to the server. It does what it needs to do. In this case, we're doing this with, quote, localhost. And so it gets the results and sends them back. Here's search quotes, same idea. In this case, we take a single string. We make a URI that encodes things as we see here. So we're going to have the search be search quote / baseball. That's what we're looking for. And then the strategy will be 0. And we'll talk more about how that works when we get into the implementation side later. And we make the request to the server, and it goes and makes that call, makes the call on the appropriate implementation strategy, searching for baseball. And then the final thing we're going to look at here is we can send a list of string queries. And once again, we make ourselves a URI that encodes everything. And here's what it looks like. You can see that we have search quotes, question mark, strategy equals 0, and sign, queries equal baseball, comma, game. So that's what happened to be in that queries list parameter. We'll take a look at that when we look in the code in more detail, the driver code in more detail. And that's what happens when we make the request call via web utils make get request. The thing I want you to remember about proxies is this is where the nasty, nitty-gritty, low-level details of programming with HTTP lurk. And so we are well advised to build abstractions to hide this. Right now, we're generating this code manually. You'll learn later in the course how to use various other modern features in Spring to automate the generation of all this code. Okay, so that's the end of the client structure and functionality.